A lot of us wonder, how would we react in a dangerous, life-threatening situation? Would we panic or somehow maintain our composure? Well, during the Vietnam War, Major Don Harden, a Las Vegas resident now, did just about everything right despite everything going very wrong. It began at 30,000 feet when the B-52 he was piloting sliced into another B-52 at 500 miles an hour. But it didn't end there. Harden's made-for-movie story is told in a new book titled Midair. The author is Craig Collins, his nephew, and both of them are with us today. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Craig Collins, you grew up in Carson City. As you were growing up, I just want to go back a little bit. You heard about your uncle's Vietnam War stories and experiences, but even as a little kid, did you know what was going on? Did you talk about it with other kids?
I had a pretty good idea simply because Don used to come and visit us on leave. I remember that a couple times, and he had, I think it was a red MG, and he came roaring up to the house, and he was like the coolest uncle ever, and he was Tom Cruise before there ever was Tom Cruise.
I was
Top
thinking
Gun
that.
before ever there was Top Gun, and he'd hop out. And one of the stories that my parents like to tell is one time he came roaring up in his MG, and my mom came out and gave him a big hug and a kiss, and then they went inside, and my dad came home from work a couple hours later, and Don was the kind of guy that just he was very handsome, and all the neighbor ladies came out of the house, and wow, who's that? And so my dad drove up, and they all came running up to him and said, "Oh, Mr. Collins, I'm not sure if you should go in there. This very handsome man just is in with your wife, and he's been there for a couple hours." And my dad just laughed, and he goes, "That's my brother-in-law." And so Don is the kind of guy that really draw attention in the neighborhood. So I had a sense of it. He would come visit us. I remember drawing pictures of B-52s, and then when I was about 6 years old, we went and visited him in Sacramento, and he took us out on the motorcycle and gave me a first-hand look at a B-52 up close, and that was one of the more memorable experiences of my young life at that point, for sure. So I definitely knew what was going on.
Major Don Harden is with us too. Don, welcome to the program.
Hi.
Don, in 1965, you were piloting a B-52.
Can I correct you there? I was a co-pilot.
Absolutely.
All my fighter pilot friends, I'm still a B-52 co-pilot.
So you were co-piloting
Yeah.
from Guam to Vietnam on a bombing mission. Another American plane in the formation was heading right toward you. Your plane's wing was sheared off over the South China Sea. Now, give us a brief explanation on how two of these 747-sized airplanes got that close together.
Well, there was a typhoon, and it sucked us in from Guam. We were 9 minutes early, so our leader was brand new. Our original leader lost his radar, traded places with number two, and number two was brand new. And he decided to do a 360-degree turn to lose 9 minutes' time right in the middle of the refueling track. And I was out of the seat when they decided to do this. When I got back in, the pilot got out, and then suddenly the two planes in front of us turned. And I said, "Hey, radar, what are they doing, a 360? And he said, "Raj." I said, "Send the pilot up. This is serious." And I said, "Don't they realize if there's another cell of B-52s, three B-52s, coming up the track south of us, we're going to meet them head on a standard rate turn?" And sure enough, we did. Halfway around the turn, I'm strapping in and double-checking everything, and I looked up, and there's a B-52 coming at me. It was about a second and a half, maybe 2 seconds away. But at that time stood still, totally still. I was living in microseconds at that time. And I saw this thing, and it was coming straight at us.
At about 500, 550 miles an hour?
1,100 miles an hour.
Well, you were closing on each other at 1,100.
Basically, closing. Relative speed was 1,100. So I looked up, and I only had a second or two. And this 18,000-pound drop tank is going to come right in the cockpit. I can see it. And it's going to hit me right in the face. And in about, a couple of microseconds, I did some mathematical calculations and realized we were going to hit. But the drop tank kind of slid underneath, and the big tail went sliding by on the right. And I was doing math calculations. Are we going to hit there? If we do, da-da-da-da. And everything was going by in supersonic speed, including my mind. Everything in my mind was that way. And then we hit, and it was just a great big huge explosion.
Wow.
They saw it 200 miles away, and I didn't know our right wing was blown off. I thought maybe the wingtip was blown off. I had gone through in literally in a couple of microseconds the anger, denial, and all that you proceed through before you die. Even if you have cancer, you got 5 years to live. Oh man, you go through all this stuff. I went through it in less than a second. So it was all there. I looked, and there's nothing I could do. Somebody ejected, and I knew it, and everything was dark. I couldn't see. I could barely see the throttles, and I couldn't see the instrument panel. So I said, it's time to eject. So I got in position, and I rotated, but the left handle rotated, the right handle wouldn't, so I squeezed the trigger, and nothing happened.
Now, hold on right there. I want Craig Collins, who your nephew, who wrote about this, to read a passage from the book about this ejection sequence and what went wrong and how it eventually happened. Craig, could you do that? Could you read this passage from the book?
Sure, and this is from my uncle telling it several times. He wrote a book also 10 years ago, so a lot of this is from him. So let me just read this. A cardinal rule of flying is to never stay with an out-of-control plane. Yet Don wasn't certain that the plane had been severely damaged and began pulling on the yoke. He didn't yet know for certain that the right wing had been blown off by the fuel tank explosion. His vision returned enough to make out the outline of the plane's altimeter. From that reading, he could determine which way was up. Don leaned forward and peered at the dial. A loud bang shook the cockpit. The sharp smell of cordite, a smokeless gunpowder, filled the air, and the instrument panel fogged instantly. The major had ejected. Don thought that he had already cost his own life by squandering precious seconds trying to fly a mortally wounded plane. Don resorted to his pilot training. He bolted upright in his seat, flight helmet hard against the headrest, butt firmly against the parachute, back straight, legs tucked, hands on the armrest ejection handles. He took a deep breath and pulled on both handles. Only the left handle moved into position. He squeezed the ejection trigger and waited to be slammed by 15 Gs of force that would catapult him into the night. But there was nothing. Don squeezed the left trigger again. Still nothing. He squeezed yet again. The ejection mechanism wasn't firing. He swallowed his panic and cursed the plane's maintenance crew. He pulled hard on the right handle, but it wouldn't budge. He squeezed the left trigger one more time, and still nothing happened. He thought of one final option. Inside his armrest was another handle that would release the parachute from the back of his seat. He would have to leave his survival kit, which was built into the seat, but could grab the parachute, climb downstairs, and jump out of one of the navigator's hatches. No one had ever manually bailed out of a jet at 30,000 feet and lived, and once he did land in the water, he'd be exposed in the ocean without a raft, food, water, or supplies. His mind quickly nixed the idea. There simply wasn't enough time, and the odds against him were astronomical. No, he would press the eject trigger one more time and then calmly await death. Again. Don looked down at the trigger in his hand. He gave it a desperate jerk. With a bang and a hiss, the seat rocketed him through the overhead hatch and into the dark.
Don, I want to ask you this question.
Sure.
It's been 50 years.
50 plus.
When you hear that story, do you get any feelings anymore about it, or is it so far ago that you don't?
I've given a couple of hundred speeches around the country about it and sold my book all over the place, and I found that I could not think about it before I got up and talked. What I had to do was just get up and tell the story.
Why couldn't you think about it?
I didn't want to. It was so traumatic. Everybody died but me, except my navigators, and of course we became best friends after that. But it was just a horrible thing to have to go through, and I just didn't want to go through it again, living it over and over and over. I still feel grief. You can't believe for all the losses, but I went through 5 combat tours, and I've got 84 names on the Vietnam Wall, and they're all close. These are guys I flew with, and in F-105s we lost a lot of them.
We're talking to Major Don Harden, a retired U.S. Air Force pilot who in 1965 had a remarkable experience over the South China Sea. Craig Collins, his nephew, has written about that in a new book called Midair. Don, a lot of us will never experience anything close to that. And if it did happen to us, most of us would probably be out of our minds with panic. Was it training, or were you born with an ability to sort of think clearly at that moment?
I had a father who was you can ask Craig, he was semi-brutal to me growing up all the time. And the last thing I said to him was, "Thanks, Dad. I wouldn't have survived Vietnam without what you did for me, what he taught me." And that was, you're going to have to do this on your own. Life isn't easy. And I just had a determination. I wanted to live. I had a lot to live for. I wanted to be an astronaut, to be honest with you. I haven't told many people that, but I wanted to become an astronaut. So I worked hard, and I did everything I had to do. I played drums all the way through college, worked my way through college. I borrowed a total of $145 from my mother, which she gave me for Christmas the year I graduated. So I graduated with no debt, and I enjoyed doing that, and I worked hard to become a pilot. I wanted to be the best fighter pilot going and then become an astronaut. But I was in B-52s because our whole class got B-52s or something like it. Anyway, it was just a determination, that and I want to live. I don't know if you've read farther into the book, but the parachute tried to kill me 4 times.
Well, I want to get to that for a second here.
Okay.
So you ejected, and you're falling with this parachute, but you're not falling exactly into nice weather. There's a typhoon you're falling into. Tell us about that experience.
Well, I ejected. The plane exploded and damaged my left leg pretty badly. I still cannot jog on it. And broke my neck. When I looked down to pull the ejection handle, my helmet was and my head was out of space, and my atlas vertebrae was twisted and tilted. And I had a chiropractor fix it about a year ago, and it still has a few problems. But shortly after I ejected, the chute opened with a mild shock. I hardly felt it, and there I am sitting in a parachute, looking down at an ocean that is on fire, and clouds all around, and the fires below kind of burned off the moisture around it, except for one great big huge column that came up at me like a nuclear bomb. I estimated at the time that it was rising at about 20,000 feet per minute, which is really fast. And so I looked at it, and it was straight below me. So I reached up and pulled my chute to slip it away from this thing. And I slipped it away, and it went right by me, but the turbulence from that and me slipping the chute caused the parachute to start swaying, and it rocked, and I nearly went right up above it and fell back into the bowl of the parachute.
Wow.
But I straightened out and finally got that. I twisted it one time to turn around and look if there were other survivors, and I saw one other parachute. And you don't screw with a parachute while you're coming down if you don't know anything about it. And our training was pretty much minimal in that respect. But they did teach us one thing. Don't look at the ground when you're coming down. Don't peek. So all I could do was peek, look, or don't peek. But coming down, I had panic. And I wanted to just let myself go into panic. And I said, panic, fight panic. I had to fight it all the time, just constantly. And that ocean was coming up, and I said to God, dear Lord, I said, let me just live in this parachute for the rest of my life. I don't want to land in that water. And it was wild. It was a turquoise blue with great big giant waves. And it was right, it just got closer and closer. And the turbulence that it was in the waves churned up all the plankton. It glowed, the turquoise. So suddenly I peeked, and sure enough, I hit the water, and it pulled me backwards, and then it spun me. And my brother-in-law at the time had set the world speed record for water skiing at a little over 100 miles an hour down at Seal Beach. And he held the world speed record for about 3 hours until his buddy broke the world speed record on him. But I broke theirs because I know I went faster than 100 miles an hour. Anyway, and I was swallowing water, and the parachute was turning, and I finally spread my legs and was able to get myself to so it would pull me while I was on my back so I could breathe, because I swallowed a lot of water with it spinning me.
Wow.
And then I couldn't release. I tried to release the 2 ring releases here. They were brand new, and the parachute shop had not loosened them up. And so they were real tight, and I took all the strength I had in both arms to release the right one. And the left one was still connected. The parachute took off like a bullwhip, and it was gone, but it was still connected to me on the left shoulder, and I forgot about it because I was too busy. Pulled in a life raft that had all the nicest things you could use in an Arctic survival situation and nothing you could use in the South China Sea in the summertime. And yet I was freezing because the winds were so high. The wind chill was something else. So eventually, and this is cutting everything short, eventually the life raft deflated, and I went up and then down and under, and I had tied myself to it, thank God. And I was underneath the water, and I reached up, and I realized I was still connected to the parachute on the left. All these risers were there. I took out my little survival knife. This is all underwater. And I was being pulled down by the parachute, which weighs several tons after even a few minutes once it's in the water. And I took out this hook blade knife, and that wasn't fast enough, so I flipped it over, and the switchblade, sharp as a razor, I went slice, 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 and it was all through, but I'd looked and I'd cut my fingers pretty badly. But I didn't care, and I kicked forward and kicked up and made it to the surface, and I probably wouldn't have been able to hold my breath more than another 10 seconds max. So I got there, and I just grabbed that life raft, and it was about the size of a basketball, and I wadded it up underneath me, and I sat there, and I went through anger again, and I cursed and swore and carried on, and I got mad, and that saved my life, because then I grabbed this stem. I took the knife very carefully and folded it up and put it away.
Right, you didn't want to puncture
them.
that. Yeah.
And I pushed on this thing and blew this life raft up and closed the thing down so it wouldn't leak air out anymore. And then I sat there, and all I had was my .38, my helmet, my .38 gun, my helmet, and my boots and my flight suit. I lost everything else.
Now, Don, this is hardly a side note. After this crash, after you went through all this, and I'm just going to mention sharks, all kinds of stuff, you kept flying until December 1972. Why?
I kept flying until I retired. I loved it. Flying it's the greatest thing you could ever do, is to control an airplane and do it properly. It's just fun. And besides, it's challenging. Besides that, the average IQ of these guys I was working with was about 140. So you're living in an advanced world. And everybody says, fighter pilots, they just go out on Friday night and get drunk. No, we go out and have a couple of beers maybe, but that's where we talk. In fact, our class commander in F-105s at Nellis ordered us all to go to the bar on Friday night after flying so we could all talk the informal conversations of flying and how you learn.
And you love that.
Oh, yeah. I wouldn't trade it. The guys, the intelligence, the hard working, everything like that. This is why I did it. I loved the guys in the fraternity of flying.
Well, you have a fascinating story. The book, Midair, is an amazing book. The author is Craig Collins, and Major Don Harden is his uncle. He's a retired U.S. Air Force pilot who survived something you're just going to have to read about in the book. I want to thank both of you for being here.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We sure appreciate it.